Well, hello. We're here for a commentary on Isaiah part 16, which will cover the chapters 63 to 66. All right, Wade, what have you got to say about this paper?
Well, this is the final section, 16 parts of Isaiah, and in this final part we see where God brings the prophecy to a head, and that God announces his divine vengeance in chapter 63, and then he's telling the prophets what he wants as watchmen, and then he talks about matters relating to Edom and from the changes which have got a lot to do with the organisation of Judea and the structure of bringing Edom back in, which happened in the 2nd century BCE. Now, there then is a psalm of intercession, and it's talking about, God is talking about his steadfast love, and the prophet then turns to the one true God as Father of the nations and contrasts him to the humanity of the patriarchs, Abraham and Jacob, that is Israel, who await the resurrection. And the structure goes on then into chapter 64, the return of power. And he outlines the return of God through the Messiah as in the power demonstrated in days of old. And that's listed through the introduction and notes. Chapter 65 then deals with God's answer to Israel in terms of their prayers and the structure. And he then deals with them. The people are silent in this phase, and he talks to them about the return and the great restoration. And he talks about the concept of them living in their own dwellings, eating their own fruit, their own produce. And then it is really with the judgment and the judgment of the demons also. But God overseeing the needs of the people and then dealing with through his divine omniscience. And the final structure will be peace. So he's promising them peace, and the end of 65 is leading into this final restoration. In chapter 66, he gives his final oracles for the restoration, which are the concluding oracles for the end of the age and the millennial restoration under Messiah. That is extremely important. And the structure then, it goes on through on temple worship and the structure of the temple and what he's doing. And this ties in to the last days, the restoration of the temple, which will take place after the Messiah commences the millennial system. And that then develops to Jerusalem's restoration. And that occurs in 66, 7 to 16. Now that structure, and it's how that the divinely restored city of Zion, Jerusalem, will provide abundance for all, and how the structure develops. And the texts, for instance, in 66:17, it's you'll be keeping the food laws, or God will deal with you, and you'll get wiped out. And all these pagan systems will be brought to a sudden and abrupt end with the return of the Messiah and the host. It's the end of the structure. Now, then we talk about from 18, verses 18 to 24, we're talking really about the witnesses, the witness of the nation, but also the concept of the witnesses as they relate to the two witnesses on the Temple Mount in the last days before the Messiah. So we tie those back in, and God reveals his glory to the nations, and they will assemble in Jerusalem with Israel, and many of the nations will become priests. These is the salvation of the Gentiles, where they're incorporated into the temple of God as members of the church of God through the elect.
Right.
And that's important. And also in the final build-up, we see that the God's people, like the new creation and the millennium, will endure forever. And we see that in verse 22. In verse 23 and 4, you're left in no doubt as to what God's going to do. He says that you'll keep the new moons from one new moon to another, you'll worship God, and you'll keep from one Sabbath to another Sabbath, you'll worship God. And that if you don't do that, you will die. And there's no second chance. The calendar of God, the temple calendar, not Hillel, will be kept, or those not keeping it will get no rain in due season. They'll keep the feast under Zechariah 14 verses 16 to 21, or they'll suffer the plagues of Egypt, and they will get no rain in due season and die of famine. Now that also works through here in 66 verses 23 to 24. It's a very serious problem. And it's not, God is saying what he's going to do. It's not a negotiation. It's not a matter of you saying, oh, well, we don't want to do that. You'll do it or you'll die. And the churches of God had better wake up to that fact. And if they're not keeping the new moons, by the time the Messiah gets here to deal with them, they're in deep trouble. They're certainly not in the first resurrection, and they will not be allowed to live into the millennial system unless they're keeping the Sabbaths, the new moons, the temple, the calendar, and the structure. And they can't be keeping Hillel. It will cost them their lives.
Right. And Wade, it might be interesting to point out that this is part 16 of a full commentary that has been done on Isaiah over the last virtually 16 Sabbaths.
Yes.
And for those that are actually within the body already, the understanding has just opened up the whole idea. This has never been done before. No other church has ever even looked close at this. And it is just so concise. Every question I had has been answered, I must say. There are points of interest in there that can be discussed. There's many verses of reference. And it's extremely concise work. As you said, in 66 it goes on to the temple worship. And if these people that want to keep claiming, we are of God, we are doing the right thing, we'll use Hillel, it doesn't matter, it's quite clear what God says he's going to do with them.
Yes, they're going to be killed. Sure. And they don't understand it, and they simply don't want to vote with their feet. And you've got one chance of staying alive. That is, keep the law and keep the temple calendar. And if you don't, you'll die. It's that simple. Isaiah is very clear. God says through Isaiah, you'll keep the new moons and you'll keep the Sabbaths according to the temple calendar, or you will die. No arguments. The summary on the intents of the chapters and the intent of Isaiah and its structure is also complicated. That is, it's very complex in terms of the intents of the chapters. There's nowhere to go. Isaiah was never explained properly by the churches of God. Firstly, we weren't allowed to while the printing press was invented, and we had to write things out by hand up until then, and when the printing press was invented, we were not allowed to print the commentaries on the Bible. When the Sardis and Laodicean systems originated through and took control through the 19th, 18th, 19th and 20th centuries, they didn't know enough. And quite frankly, their ditheism and binitarianism in the 20th century was a disgrace, and they didn't deal with Isaiah because it was outside of their paradigm, and they couldn't answer the problems. Now, what we've done is, for the first time in the history of the Churches of God, produce a commentary on Isaiah, and the structure in Isaiah deals with the structure of the chapters. And it's important to note that modern scholarship tries to divide Isaiah up into 2 parts and also 3 parts, and then post-date the structures of Isaiah to after the temple system. That's covered in the introduction, and it's important that we understand just what's happening. It's taken from the introduction at the beginning of Isaiah and reiterated at the last part. The intents of the chapters are all condensed in this final structure, where each text is explained, that is, it's cross-related to each of the major texts within each of the parts. Now, that explains the intent of Isaiah in each of the structures and the phases that the prophet went through. God used him, and he used him up through from chapter 1 to chapter 39, then from chapter 40 to chapter 55 was another section explaining the intent of God. Now, by dividing it up, these modern revisionist scholars disguise the true intent of Isaiah, and they refuse to properly connect Isaiah to the New Testament. The New Testament is powerless without the Old Testament. The New Testament is based completely on the Old Testament, on Isaiah and all of the prophets through Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and all the latter prophets, and then on into the Gospels. You cannot divorce any of them. And it is a satanic argument to say that the Old Testament is done away and that the New Testament is all you have to do. If you do that, you won't be in the first resurrection, and you won't be in the millennium under Messiah, and nor will your children. They will not live either if they've got that mental attitude, or they'll be taken and re-educated in the millennial system. This is not a game, and the time's up. Satan's time's up. He's going to the pit of Tartaros within 4 years, and he'll be there with all of the demons, and they'll stay there. And if you're dependent upon demons and their power, it's finished. You will see the Messiah, and you will do as you are told. All of the world will obey, or they will not live into the millennial system, and they'll be dealt with in the second resurrection. At the end of this, the intent of the chapters, there are 2 sections in the appendixes. Now, what we deal with are the names of God in Isaiah, how the structure of the names of God vary through the text of Isaiah. There are things in the English, you get Lord and God, and that's all you get, or God of hosts, or whatever. But the names of God through from Yah 3050, the Yahovah, Yahovah, and Adon, that's the 113 structure of Adon, 433 Eloah, and then the various other names, and 136 Adonai. And you'll find that in this text you'll see all the names of God are listed in Strong's Concordance, but that doesn't disclose the actual forgeries in the texts made by the sovereign, and that's in the next appendix, the next sequence, which is based on the Bullinger's Appendix 32 of the Companion Bible, which lists all of the places in the Bible text, the Masoretic text, where the Sopherim changed the names of God from Yahovah, Yehovah, through to Adonai, Lord. And that's the sense of Lord 136. Adonai is actually still in Strong's, and you miss the forgeries unless you read this appendices, this last of the appendixes. Now, it's important, and there are many, as we did in the Psalms, we listed all the changes in the Psalms, so also we've done with Isaiah. And it's important that that is used and read and tied together in the summary with 16, so that you've all got the full assessment and explanation in this commentary on Isaiah, and it is the first complete commentary the churches of God have ever written.
And Wade, look, I must say, through the 16 parts that we've done, and more so in this commentary, as it said, the names of God that are placed there, that goes everything from his mercy right through to his extreme power and vengeance that he's going to bring, because people haven't understood this book of the Bible.
No.
As you said, so many of them have tried to hide it because either sheer ignorance, and they don't know the truth of it,
or they don't want to know, that's the fact.
They don't want to know, and they don't want others to really know the truth.
Yeah. Yes, the argument is that the Trinitarians don't want to know that they're not going to heaven, and that Christ is coming here and he's going to take over the planet, and there'll be a 1,000-year rule of the saints.
Right.
They don't want to know that, and they don't believe it. They want to go to heaven so that they'll hang on to this until Messiah gets here and puts them all to the sword.
Right.
They'd rather the human race died than changed their pagan or heretical beliefs.
And that really is the or the operational minds of Satan and his demons.
Yes, that's exactly
They don't want humans to be put into the elect. They just don't want to.
They're totally locked into error because of how they view things.
That's what it is.
Antinomian misrepresentation.
Antinomianism is the exact argument. The argument of the Gnostics.
Unitarianism, bitheism, Trinitarianism, it just locks them into disobedience, and they're clouded, and they never come to the truth because that stops them from doing so.
Yeah, no, they don't want to obey God's law.
Right.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
And the demons have got into their heads that you don't have to, and you don't have to keep God's calendar, you don't have to structure your social structure around God's calendar.
Yes.
Sorry, it's time's up. You've got 3.5 years plus 45 days. And if you don't get your act together, you'll be dead. And it's the same, the churches of God will be wiped out, and there'll only be one church left, and everyone will be in it, and everyone else will be dead. That's the plan of God.
It's emphatic, yeah.
It's emphatic.
Yeah.
And when I know we've covered that paper and the summary there, but I must ask, what do you think stops these people from leaving these groups? Is it something to do with humility? Is it something to do with their investment that they think they put into them?
It's part of the Stockholm Syndrome. That they've been brainwashed from World War II onwards, and their parents have been brainwashed, and they simply have not got the guts and the integrity to declare what they're doing false. They're in a social club, and they haven't got the courage to leave and work for the faith.
Right.
It's that simple, and there's no other explanation. I've watched them for 40 years. I understand how they work, I understand everything about it. In fact, I've probably been closely involved with them for the last 60 years. So I know exactly what went on. I know what they do. I understand what the errors are and what's got to be done. And the same way with the mainstream system, we've all been in it. Most of our people, the churches of God, were called out of the mainstream system over the years. And we've all been there. We understand what they're trying to push. And I said to a priest once, would now be 65 years ago or more, 70 years ago. I said, what day is the Sabbath? And he said, Sunday. And I said, so the Jews got it wrong. And he said, no, it was Saturday, but we changed it. And I said, who's we? The church, he said, changed it. I said, Anglican Church wasn't around when they started Sunday. I said, you mean to say we are dependent upon the Catholic Church to worship on Sundays? And he went, you'd suddenly realise what he'd said. And he went, oh, yes. And he wasn't very happy with me after that.
No, I did.
But I realised then it was all lies. They didn't have control over what they were doing, and they'd all changed it for convenience to suit themselves. That was the truth of the matter.
Right.
And really the bottom line for all those people that are in those groups out there that aren't doing their due diligence on themselves, they're relying on these lies that have been spat out by ministry and leaders.
Yeah.
Really are going to have no one else to blame but themselves, are they?
Yes, they have to blame themselves. And quite frankly, it's going to get very uncomfortable between now and 2028. And unless you act and repent and change the errors, abandon these heresies like Hillel and this Roman calendar that works based on the god Janus, and you stop keeping Christmas and Easter and worshipping on Sundays, you will die. And there's no other. The Bible is quite clear. There's no argument about it.
Learn not the way of the heathen.
Yes, you will die. And that's the important thing you have to get through your heads.
Right.
We will keep helping you. It's all there, all in writing. We'll keep putting these videos now out so that you can take each place, subject, problem, one at a time and study to get to the truth. Once you're at the truth, we'll be able then to help you get to the first resurrection, hopefully, and not into the millennium.
And it's wonderful because it's open to the general public. There's no member sessions in the churches of God where you have to have a secret password to get into areas which is totally blocked off from the general public. So if they do make mistakes in there, the general public aren't going to know. It's only the insiders which will tolerate the errors, and they haven't got the guts to look at their Bibles and flee from them. So
yes.
Everything's open to the general public, everything's biblically proven to be true, and you can test it yourself.
And it's what we believed when Christ taught the apostles. We haven't changed. My personal 47th great uncle was ordained by Christ and became the first bishop of Rome. We do exactly the same thing they did. My 48th great grandfather gave the blocks of land in Britain at Glastonbury to the church so that they could build the temple, build the first church in Britain. All these things we do, they did. We haven't changed. My 49th great grandmother was the daughter of Joseph of Arimathea. She was the cousin of the Virgin. I'm the 48th cousin of Jesus Christ. That is, the cousin 48 times removed.
Right.
So all of us are all interrelated, all of us are relatives of the body of Christ and Desposini. We've done it all before, and it's not going to change, except when Christ gets here, it'll be put back to what it was in the first century.
Hallelujah.
Very good. And look, chances are you go visit the website, you've got a question, you will find the answer.